Cystic fibrosis is a disease that is a genetic defect. And essentially, and I've said this before to all of you, your lungs are a bunch of pipes that lead to a bunch of balloons that are all stacked on top of one another. Now, when you zoom in on these pipes are built with airway epithelial cells. Now, we call them airway epithelial cells just generically, but there's many different types of cells. There's your traditional airway epithelial cell, there's secretory cells, there's ionocytes, there's deuterosomal cells, there's neuroendocrine cells. But when you look and zoom in even further microscopically at the airway, you'll notice a few things about these cells when you zoom in. On the outside of these cells, towards where your environment is interfacing with these cells, you see these molecules that we call cilia. Cilia are responsible for beating back and forth and taking material that you might inhale that your body doesn't like and bringing it back up so you cough it out. And to do that, these cilia require mucus, and there's many different types of mucus. There's MUC5A, there's MUC5B, MUC5AC. All of these things, the mucus, the cilia, they all work together cohesively. The way that we produce the mucus, because as you guys all know, when you guys are coughing, you can cough up mucus, is we basically make a certain type of fluid. And that fluid has different ingredients, but there's a ratio to these ingredients. Just like when you are eating your grandmother's best recipe, there's a ratio of ingredients. You can't have too much salt, you can't have too much pepper. Cystic fibrosis, there are actually membrane channels. These are proteins that are in the membrane of your cell, specifically the secretory cells of your airway. And what they're transporting is different ions across this membrane, chloride, sometimes sodium, but what we're talking about here is chloride. Now, in cystic fibrosis, this channel is defective. Either the protein misfolded and it's not working as well, or the protein's absent completely and you don't have it, or you have something in between. So what happens? So what happens to the airway is that your mucus is not as thin, it's a little bit thicker. When your mucus is thicker, your cilia feel that pressure, so they can't beat back and forth as much. And what you're actually creating is a nice bath for bacteria to hang out in the airway and chill. You're also creating thicker mucus. Now remember, when you take that big breath of air in and you're taking the oxygen out of the air to try to put it into your alveoli, those balloons, if you block that airway with mucus, we call it hypoventilation. You can't breathe very well. So again, cystic fibrosis is a disease that's caused by a lack of function of a membrane channel that we call CFTR, right? And so if you don't have it in the airway, it leads to what I just mentioned. But CFTR is all over the body. And what you heard from Maddie was it really affected her GI tract. And those are the primary places where we're going to see it as physicians. Again, I'm a pulmonologist. I see it frequently. Is you're going to see it affect not only the airway, but you're also going to see it affect the GI tract. And these patients might have bowel obstructions. These patients might have, loose stool. These patients might have abdominal pain. But whatever symptoms they have, it's directly related to that lack of function of that ion channel. And I'm sure you learned that along the way, right, Maddie?
Yes, definitely.
When you were growing up, did you have a lot of airway symptoms? Did you just have GI symptoms? What symptoms did you have most of the time?
I had so as a kid, my airway was an issue as far as, catching viruses or getting infections from like the soil around me and things like that. But my biggest hurdle as a young person was my GI system. I think I required IV antibiotics 2 or 3 times as a young toddler, but I dealt with GI symptoms every day, and then I still deal with them. Once I was diagnosed, I was immediately placed on pancreatic enzymes because I had pancreatic insufficiency. That was the number one thing they thought causing the brunt of the issues I was facing at the time. And so I dealt with pancreatic insufficiency, like you said, extreme abdominal pain, a lot of constipation as a young kid. Sometimes I would end up in the hospital because of the pain, because of not being able to go, and things like that.
How young were you when you were having to go through this and be at the hospital all the time? And what emotional toll did that take on you?
So, as far as how young I was, I didn't have a prolonged hospital stay until I was probably 15 years old. I would, go to the hospital with cystic fibrosis. You have very frequent checkups every 3 months. You're going in to see your whole CF team. You're seeing a pulmonologist, a nutritionist, a social worker, all of those things. That's pretty frequently. And then add in if you get an infection. As a kid, I didn't do inpatient IV antibiotics. I would get an IV or a PICC line. And even as a young kid, I have pictures of me with when they used to put the board underneath the kid's arm so that they couldn't bend their arm and everything like that. But with the emotional toll of it, I don't ever really know how to answer that as far as when I was young, probably before I was 15, because I started from a young age. It was something that was in my normal
It was your normal.
routine. Yeah, I didn't enjoy it. I didn't love getting an IV or, it wasn't easy getting my blood drawn as a young kid, but I only knew it as something that I had to do. I didn't really think of it until I was older as like something different than everybody else. And so therefore it was so much harder.